Welcome to @Cronkite News, your social sharing connection where you choose the news. Facebook likes and shares, tweets, retweets, and favorites. YouTube views and subscriptions. We're watching you watch us. From our digital home at cronkitenews.azpbs.org to your television, web browser, or mobile device. Let's get a refresh on the top Arizona news of the week.
Voters and politicians alike are calling yesterday's Arizona presidential preference election a disaster. Secretary of State Michelle Reagan just announced that her office would launch a full-scale statewide review. And Phoenix Mayor Greg Stanton called for an official Department of Justice investigation into voting delays and reduced polling locations. Cronkite News reporters Audrey Wheel and Ben Marjat are live at the Capitol with the fallout from Tuesday night.
In case you missed it, voters lined the streets until past midnight, some of them giving up, others getting to the end of the line only to find out that they couldn't vote. The reason for such long lines, Maricopa County reduced the amount of polling places from 200 a few years ago to 60 this year.
I spoke to one Maricopa County supervisor who says that was the worst election he's ever seen. He voiced his concerns a month ago, but says they fell on deaf ears to a board of supervisors who ultimately approved the polling plans.
They didn't think, oh, this is a really big election. We got an increase in early ballots. We should increase the precinct polls.
Protesters demanded answers this morning outside the Maricopa County Recorder's office.
It's outrageous. We're calling on the County Board of Supervisors to get some answers.
And that answer is money. This video shows Maricopa County Elections Director Karen Osborne speaking to the Board of Supervisors just last month.
We have had, at your direction, to try and keep the press preference as cheap as humans could do it.
District 5 Supervisor Steve Gallardo defends the board, saying election officials didn't ask for more money.
Not once did they ever say, we don't have enough money to conduct this election. If money was an issue, I need them to come talk to us so we can address the issue. The fact is, this was just poor judgment on their part.
And today, Maricopa County Recorder Helen Purcell admitted to that.
I take full responsibility for what happened yesterday.
I brought it up. I brought it up back in February that this was going to be an issue. 60 polling places was questionable. I knew from the get-go that we had a lot of excitement. We saw it in New Hampshire, we saw it in Iowa, we saw it in every early primary state, the record number of voter participation.
But the county recorder said the number of polling places was determined scientifically.
That scientific method, unfortunately, is garbage.
Gallardo says after yesterday's disaster, the board is focusing on making sure this doesn't happen in future elections, especially during a busy election year.
And Democratic politicians are speaking out today, saying the long lines meant that many voters were disenfranchised at the polls, which may have affected certain districts more than others.
It was a huge failure for our democratic process and our democratic system yesterday.
No matter how you look at it, last night's presidential preference election was chaos, with some voters having to wait in line for over 5 hours and others being turned away completely. But today, Democratic lawmakers are saying it affected some groups of voters more than others.
Anytime you reduce the number of options to vote, fewer people vote, period.
And in the West Valley, in the Maryville area, in the Glendale area, South and West Glendale, there was only one polling place in that entire area. The polling places were very spread out in the West Valley, and that's really disappointing given the high minority population in that area.
Quezada said low-income and minority voters who are more reliant on public transportation were less likely to make it to the polls, and even those that did make it to a polling place had to wait hours to cast their ballots, long after both races were already called.
Because the polling places were limited, which resulted in longer lines, which resulted in the races being called before people cast their votes, you saw a number of voters that said, well, the race is over, I'm just going to go home now.
Some called for Maricopa County Recorder Helen Purcell to step down.
And when the public tells them that they are no longer wanted, they are no longer needed, they are no longer qualified, that public servant needs to listen.
It's clear that she was not interested in letting the democratic will of the people be heard, and it was clear voter suppression that should be punished.
This is why they could be concerned about problems at the polls. Take a look at this video. Lines to vote wrapping around 2 corners, and it just keeps going.
Polling places are still dealing with the extreme voter turnout, staying open hours later than originally planned. Cronkite News reporter Jackie Padilla spent time at one of the busy polling places where voters waited patiently to cast their ballots.
Hurry up and wait. That's something voters throughout Arizona experienced as they stood in line to cast their ballot for the presidential preference election.
God, I did wait in line for 3 hours. Did not expect that, but it was worth it.
With such a long wait, people found creative ways to pass the time.
Yeah, there's a lady in front of us who kept marking the whole process in chalk and just little notes to the rest of us. And when we reached about here, we hit about 71.
It was a lot of standing around, or in Victoria Byron's case, sitting.
Do you think people are jealous of your chairs?
Absolutely. We've been told that we're smart about 1 million times. And it was really per chance that they were in my truck.
At 7 p.m., the polls closed, and this official had to turn away anyone who tried to get in line after that.
I don't go home till they're done.
Leaving hopeful voters disappointed.
They said, well, I'm at the end of the line, so that you didn't make it. So that was it.
But Pauline Begay, who was with her son, made it just in time to cast one of the last ballots.
The guy behind me said, the line is closed now. So we're like, everybody was like, all right, you made it. So everybody was hollering.
It was clear today that despite the long wait, many voters felt it was important to fulfill their civic duty. In downtown Phoenix, Jackie Padilla, Cronkite News.
Voters across the state found their way to the polls today, casting their vote for who they want to claim the spot as their Democratic and Republican presidential nominees.
Some voters literally spent hours in line to do something that was more to them than just connecting the line on a piece of paper. Reporter Julia Thatcher spoke with some folks who waited hours just to vote.
I cannot even begin to imagine the amount of people that have already gone through those voting booths. What surprised me most about today, however, was that everyone I spoke with was in a surprisingly good mood despite the lines.
An hour and a half.
Hour and a half.
Oh, since 2 hours.
Parking lots were packed and lines were long. But can you believe just how long some were? Hundreds of people gathered at 7th Avenue in Glendale to cast their ballots, and all for different reasons.
A lot of good men died so I could stand in line to vote.
Because I feel like this is the first year where it's actually going to make a difference, and there's a huge amount of people that are actually going out to vote this year, and I want to be a part of that.
Seeing this many people wait in line made us curious if the turnout was anticipated.
Obviously not as long as they have been.
But one of the biggest culprits for the long lines?
The reason why we kind of condensed to 60 polling places is because the majority of our voters are not eligible to vote in today's election because they are independent voters, unfortunately.
The county court reporter's office said part of the preparations for today was making sure independent voters didn't show up to polling locations, but they said thousands still did. But the long lines didn't stop people from sitting in the sun and waiting their turn to make their voices heard. 98-year-old Mary DeWorth waited an hour in line before they brought her in from the sun to cast her vote.
Well, I think it's important to vote, and everybody should get out to vote.
The county court recorder's office stressed the importance that if you are registered as an independent, that you stay home. It will only create delays if you do vote, but if you are eligible, you can visit any of the voting locations. In Phoenix, Julia Thatcher, Cronkite News.
When you don't like the candidates in your party, switch. That seems to be the pattern for many Arizonans. According to the county recorder's office, a large number of voters switched parties just in time for the presidential preference election.
But as Cronkite News reporter Jesse Schultz discovered, this also opens a window for voter fraud.
Amy Vanalik has lived in Arizona for more than 20 years and has voted in every election since. But this year, she experienced something new.
So I wanted to change my party affiliation. So I went online and changed my party affiliation, but then I received ballots for both Republicans and Democrats in the mail.
2 ballots and even more confusion.
I just want to know, like, who else is doing that, and if it could lead to voter fraud.
We took Vinolik's question to Maricopa County Recorder Helen Purcell, who tells Cronkite News it's all about the calendar. The cutoff to file for a party affiliation change was February 22nd, and early ballots went out just 2 days later. Since Vinolik filed at the last minute, the office hadn't recognized her party change before ballots were in the mail.
They can try to send them in, but they're not going to count. We would immediately remove that because that first ballot has already been disabled.
Even if you did receive 2 ballots in the mail, make sure to vote for the party that you're registered for, or else your vote could be invalid. Purcell says Vinolik is probably not alone.
We had an awful lot of people change their registration on that last weekend before the cutoff. So I'm guessing that probably happened quite a bit.
Every vote counts, it should count, and I want to make sure that my vote counts and everybody gets 1 vote and not 2.
She plans to drop off her ballot at one of the 60 election sites around Maricopa County today. In Phoenix, Jesse Schultz, Cronkite News.
But Trump opponents tried to make their voices stand out as well all weekend long. Reporter Ben Marjat was tracking the action outside the rally in the East Valley.
Protests erupted at Trump rallies across the U.S. this past weekend. Here in Arizona, organizers tried to make sure their message was received by more than just those attending the Republican candidate's rally. A peaceful morning in Fountain Hills quickly turned rowdy.
Coming here yelling at you.
But the people making the most noise were actually miles away from Republican frontrunner Donald Trump's weekend rally. A small group of anti-Trump protesters literally shut down Shea Boulevard, the main route into Fountain Hills, for around 3 hours by parking their cars across all 3 lanes and backing up traffic for miles. Forcing some to have to walk a few miles to get to the rally and preventing others from just getting home.
I understand some of these people's concerns, but when you're infringing on my constitutional right to move about my country freely.
When the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office started towing cars, Trump supporters applauded. But protesters dug their heels in. Jacinta Gonzalez actually locked herself to a van. The final tally from the hours-long effort, 3 arrested and at least 6 cars towed. Trump, who was running late because of an early morning event in downtown Phoenix, was not delayed by the protesters. While 2 of the people arrested were released that same night, Gonzalez was reportedly handed over to federal immigration agents, according to Mi Gente's website. In the broadcast center, Ben Marjat, Cronkite News.
Trump is using immigration and the border wall to win Arizona voters. As Cronkite News reporter Mauricio Casillas shows us, that message had strong appeal for followers at his rally.
During his nearly half-hour speech in Fountain Hills, the Republican presidential frontrunner was loud and clear with his message.
You are going to be so proud of your family, yourself, your president, and your country. We are going to win again all the time.
Donald Trump's high-profile Arizona supporters, former Governor Jan Brewer and Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio, were by his side.
Pay for that wall.
Several thousands of supporters attended the rally to hear him speak one last time before the state's primary.
I was really happy. I mean, you could see the crowd is just, makes me, maybe America has a chance.
And many of Trump's Arizona supporters are backing him because of his staunch stance on illegal immigration.
I think it's hurting Arizona, especially since we're so close to the border.
Trump's biggest applause during the rally came when he mentioned building a border wall. It's a message that resonates with a lot of people here in Arizona, but critics still say that it's not a feasible plan.
And unless you have a border, you don't have a country, folks. You don't have a country.
It breaks my heart. It seems so un-American. And yet I know so many people want it.
At the start of his speech, protesters arrived and started chanting.
Dump Trump, booing him, si se puede.
Despite the fact that illegal immigration from Mexico is at an all-time low, it still remains a divisive issue here in Arizona.
We're being invaded here. It's like our government is a government from another country or something.
Trump's border plan is expected to lead to an increase in voter turnout for the Arizona primary. In Fountain Hills, I'm Mauricio Casillas, Cronkite News.
Hillary Clinton is speaking now at Carl T. Hayden High School in Phoenix. Let's listen in.
Call him a friend, not only because of that service he has given, but because of what he's continuing to do. By Gabby's side, speaking out over and over again. And as they both said, like many people in Arizona and many people around our country, they've been gun owners for a long time. And you know what? There's a right in our country to be a gun owner. What we are advocating, what we are standing up for and speaking out for are common sense gun reform measures. And I also want to just recognize a couple that I met just before coming in, Lonnie and Sandy Phillips, who are here. They lost their daughter, Jessie, in the Aurora movie theater massacre. And they've been trying to do what they could to travel around the country and to sue the gun makers and the gun site online where the murderer got all of his ammunition, and nobody asked a question. And they're trying to raise this to a high visibility. I can't imagine the courage that it takes for people like Gabby and Mark and the Phillipses, but I am with them. I'm going to stand with them. I'm going to work with them. I'm going to fight.
Of all the candidates on the ballot, Bernie Sanders is the only one still in Arizona. After a weekend with many candidate visits, the Vermont senator spends his day at the Northern Arizona University campus.
Despite being the underdog, the Vermont senator has held half a dozen events across the state, and Zizung visited Sanders' campaign office to see what's going on behind the scenes.
In the hours leading up to Arizona presidential preference election, volunteers and staffers work calmly and make their last pitch to Valley voters.
Y soy involuntario con la campaña de Bernie Sanders para la presidencia.
Reaching out in English and Spanish, many traveling hundreds of miles to make sure the senator secures the nomination in July.
It's pretty crazy. I arrived from New Mexico on Friday morning. Since then, we've been doing a mixture of phone banking, making calls to potential voters, and getting out the vote. Today, we're focused on hitting as many doors as possible.
With the clocks ticking, lunch has to be on the go. But on the other side of town, the enthusiasm is not well received. Chris Hurstam, who's been active in the Arizona state capitol for 3 decades, thinks the numbers are stacked against Sanders.
Hillary has such a large lead that Bernie Sanders needs to win about 70% of the Democratic vote from now until the convention. That is very hard to do.
While favored by her supporters for her experience as a seasoned politician, others think Hillary Clinton is lacking the trustworthiness on her rival, especially when it comes to immigration reform.
As a matter of fact, a lot of the measures that Hillary Clinton is supporting now in her run for presidency have been adopted through the Bernie Sanders immigration package. So it's really new to her.
Daniel Palomino also expressed disappointment towards Clinton's lack of action to stop deportation under Obama administration. In Phoenix, Zizung, Cronkite News.
Now the focus shifts from candidates to the voters, but not all Arizonans registered to vote will have a voice in tomorrow's election. Ben Brown joins us with the details.
What was supposed to be a news conference addressing early ballot voting in Arizona quickly turned into a heated discussion here at the Maricopa County Elections Office.
Let's be very clear. I'm not advocating for a caucus system. I'm advocating for the taxpayers to not have to pony up $10 million when everyone can't participate.
And that's been the point of contention for months now. Independent voters and the right to have a say in the presidential preference election.
I cannot find in myself a conservative argument why we say everyone's going to pay for something, but yet we're going to bar 1/3 of our voters from participating in it.
Arizona has a closed primary system, which means only voters registered with a participating political party, such as Democrat, Republican, or Green, can vote.
Well, I think it's unfair that we have these people who can't vote in an election. They're registered voters.
Helen Purcell, the Maricopa County Recorder, and Reagan both support House Bill 2567, which suggests that each party pay for their own presidential preference election, and in turn can decide whether to allow independents to vote.
This isn't some, crazy Republican idea. This is a bipartisan idea.
Even so, Maricopa County elections workers still expect a large voter turnout.
With the excitement and the interest that we have seen in this election, I'm anticipating that we will have in Maricopa between 60 and 65% turnout.
Republican and Democrat voters can head to 60 polling stations across Maricopa County to cast their ballot. Republican and Democrat voters can head to 60 polling stations across Maricopa County to cast their ballot. In downtown Phoenix, Ben Brown, Cronkite News.
President Obama will travel to Cuba with his family on Monday. It's the first trip by a U.S. president to the island in 90 years. Now that the president has eased travel restrictions, Americans hope to visit Cuba. Cronkite News reporter Claire Benitez joins us to talk about the new rules.
Americans who want to travel to Cuba individually rather than a group must sign an affidavit, save their travel records for 5 years, and engage with the Cuban people during their visit. That's part of the president's plan to improve U.S.-Cuba relations.
Baltasar Hernandez shot this video during his recent trip to Cuba. He traveled there with 18 ASU students in his international political economy class.
They don't receive a lot of American tourists or travelers at all, and so for them to be able to speak to me about sort of my experiences in the United States and for me to get to be able to speak with them, it was a very enlightening experience for both of us. We're heading into the Museo Nacional de Bellas Artes.
That opportunity was limited to educational groups, but now more Americans will be able to visit the island. A U.S. travel agency that handles Cuba trips explained the new rules.
Individual travel, being a couple, being a family, being a couple of friends, and so on, as long as they comply with the regulation.
Demand is high because most Americans have been forbidden from traveling to the island.
And right now there are 2 or 3 hotels under construction which started years ago and it's still not finished. So we have more American demand putting pressure on existing hotels. They have not hired new tour guides. They did not purchase new vehicles, being vans or buses.
Cuba might not be prepared just yet, but the Cuban people are ready to welcome Americans.
And they're very eager to welcome and receive the influx of American tourists.
Commercial flights to Cuba could begin as early as this fall. Major airlines, including American, United, and Southwest, have submitted applications to the federal government for permission to fly to the island. Claire Benitez, Cronkite News.
Now, here's an @Cronkite News pick of the week, a favorite from the Cronkite News staff.
Thanks for the memories. It was an iconic song for comedian Bob Hope, but it also neatly summarized a trip to Washington this week by a group of World War II veterans from Arizona. Cronkite News reporter Samantha Witherwax has more from our Washington bureau.
The memories came flooding back for the Honor Flight Arizona veterans who were here this week to tour the nation's capital, and the thanks came showering down from young and old alike. The changing of the guard at Arlington National Cemetery is one of the ways that the nation pays its respects. And for World War II veteran Jim Mendy, it was also an opportunity to reflect on his own service.
When people would say thank you to my hat, and I'd say, well, can't say that it was a pleasure, but it was an experience, a good experience in many ways.
Honor Flight Arizona is a group that brings veterans like Mendy to Washington, D.C. to see the memorials that the nation built in their honor, like the World War II Memorial.
This memorial, there's a lot of sayings engraved, that are so true that they should be publicized to the young people today.
While there were tears, not all of the memories were somber.
It was fun, but I was glad to get home, and then I got home and nothing was the same, so then I joined the Army. Patrick was 82nd Airborne Division. Yeah, it was all right. I was young and was jumping out of perfectly good airplanes.
Those memories will be preserved by memorials like these and by the thanks of new generations.
Look at the kids here at the memorial. They come up without being prompted by their parents, and they say thank you. We don't need the thank yous. We appreciate them, but we did at the time what had to be done, and happy to have done it.
Since its first flight in 2009, Honor Flight Arizona has flown 1,200 veterans to Washington to see their memorial, including the group that's returning to Arizona this evening. Reporting live in Washington, Samantha Witherwax, Cronkite News.
Cronkite News tracks your likes, tweets, and shares from all our social sites to bring you this news special. At Cronkite News, our weekly refresh. Join the conversation so you choose the news. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, subscribe to us on YouTube, and log on to cronkitenews.azpbs.org for top Arizona stories anytime.
For only the third time in the award's 74-year history, a Phoenix-based news operation wins the prestigious Alfred I. DuPont Columbia Award for Excellence in Broadcast Journalism. And this year, that news operation is Cronkite News, the news division of Arizona PBS, honored for its work on the groundbreaking documentary, Hooked, Tracking Heroin's Hold on Arizona. Cronkite News at Arizona PBS, award-winning journalism you can count on from the station you trust.